I was in the capital from a place long from here, and I came here for one reason: to attack and keep coming. Not to ask, but just to give. Not to want, but just to sin. Sing the power warrior down everybody's throat in the WWE till they become sick of it. Well, you're gonna get sick of it, because this freaking nation right here is just beginning to swell. And when I get big enough, brother, there ain't gonna be room for anybody else but me and all the warriors floating through the veins and the power of the warrior. How must I prepare, you must ask yourself? Should I jump up the tallest building in the world? Should I lay on the lawn and let him run over me with lawnmowers? Should I go to Africa and let him trample me with raging elephants? You can feel it, dude! You can feel it! Load the spaceship with the rocket fuel. Load it with the words. In my final meeting with the gods from the heavens above, as they spoke to me and hit me with the power of the ultimate warrior, they told me, exit stage left, exit stage right. There is no place to run. All the fuses in the exit signs have been burned out. With the command of my voice, I raise the level of the worst to one that can't be reproduced. Dig your claws into my organs. Stretch into my tendons. Bury your anchors into my bones. For the power of the warrior will always prevail. Family that I live for only breathes the air that smells of combat. With or without the faceplate, I am the ultimate warrior. The heavens have opened up from above, and the warriors have spoken. You felt the power that makes the skies rumble and the earth shake. Come on in, where nightmares are the best part of my day. I live for anger and frustration. Combat is where I will be. I look above to the gods, and when you fall below the skeletons of the warriors past, the power of the warriors will become the eighth wonder of the world. Normal people, the people that walk the streets every day, we cannot understand. Now you must deal with the creation of all the unpleasantries in the entire universe. As I feel the injection from the gods above, I only know that the ultimate warrior is totally out of control. As you, Hulk Hogan, travel to Wrestlemania, take the two pilots that have already made the sacrifice. Shove that control into a nosedive, Hulk Hogan.
So I have no idea why at the end of that, the Ultimate Warrior was channeling Vincent Price. Hello, and welcome to a special Radulich in Broadcasting podcast. This is in defense of the Ultimate Warrior. And why are we doing this? Well, I happen to have the pleasure of being on a casual hero show recently called The Draft, which you should have been able to hear on my network, but damn you, Blog Talk Radio and your caps on uploads. So I wasn't able to upload the show here, but I'm sure by now people have heard that in my fantasy wrestling federation, I drafted such luminary wrestlers, workers, draws, superstars, such as Bill Goldberg, Brock Lesnar, and, of course, what drove the entire podcast off the rails and into the ditch, the Ultimate Warrior. And subsequently, since that podcast, I've had many discussions, including one tonight, which was sort of the genesis of this idea, about how the Warrior, yes, a little crazy, certainly got crazier as the years went on, but you change a few things about Vince McMahon and how he ran his promotion, you book the Ultimate Warrior better than they did back then when he became champion after WrestleMania 6. And the whole story changes. So Pat Mullin and I got to talking tonight, and we said, the Ultimate Warrior isn't as ridiculous as a pick as was made to sound on the Casual Heroes Draft podcast. So we thought, let's take this opportunity tonight to regale in the glory that is the Ultimate Warrior. Tonight, myself and my legal team, Pat Mullin, and joining us from the Casual Heroes, Gavin Napier, will discuss at length the Ultimate Warrior, the good, the bad, and the Hogan. So, without further ado, from the 401 Ground and Pound radio show, former writer of The Blueprint and boxing aficionado, and quite frankly, my brother from another mother, Mr. Pat Mullin. How do you do, sir?
Sorry, I had to get in the character for this, and I had to channel the Warriors from above a little bit as I assumed the controls of the show, Mark Radulich.
Did you like the mashup of the promos?
I love the mashup of the promos. It brought me right back to some of my favorite years.
I honestly was going to say when that was all over, well, case dismissed. But then no one would have understood what the hell I was talking about. But I honestly, what more can you say about the Warrior after hearing all of that? Well, I'm sure there's something you can say, and the man who's probably going to say it to me is the man that runs the Casual Heroes podcast. He also, at one time, I don't know if he's still doing it, was doing the top 5 or top 10, one of the two, for Larry Zonka's 411 Wrestling. He is, of course, Gavin Napier. How you doing, buddy?
Well, I'm a little disappointed that one of the quotes from the promos in the mashup wasn't the illustrious graduation speech at Connecticut in which Warrior informed us that queering don't make the world work.
Oh, no. Why do you have to go there?
Beyond that, I'm doing well.
We're not going to discuss queering tonight. That'll be on a subsequent podcast entitled "In Defense of Queering," but that's for a later show.
A branch of the Whiskey Rebellion.
Exactly. All right, let's get into this. So let me again start off with sort of my rationale for the Warrior, and then nothing so formal as I do on my other shows. We're just going to kick this around and try not to talk over each other. My thing was, and maybe Gavin, I was wrong about this in my interpretation of what this was supposed to be, but while I enjoyed Jed's real world-esque, the best part about this federation is what's going on behind the camera idea, and it brought a lot of laughs. I don't see how any promotion headed by Jeff Jarrett with that locker room is ever going to draw any money. And that was, and I thought that about a couple of the rosters that were thrown together. I thought the idea of this thing is to draw what you think would be the most promotable, most marketable company. So when I was picking guys, yes, I picked guys that I favored, but I also thought, let me pick guys that actually drew money. And while the Warrior is controversial in that aspect, as there were some things that were done at the time post his winning of the championship, I don't think it can be denied, and I think this is where we're going to start tonight. I don't think it can be denied that the Ultimate Warrior was a legitimate, universal, worldwide draw. The man, he and Hulk Hogan together, because I don't think you can just say Hulk Hogan by himself sold out the Sky Dome in Toronto. Those two guys together sold that thing out. The Warrior more than held up his end of the deal, and I think the world was ready for a Warrior-led WWE, and that he was in fact undone by a company who was not fully committed behind him. So let's start there. You guys say crazy, not crazy, right on the money, Radulich, out of your mind. Pat, we'll start with you. That's actually, let me switch gears. Gavin, let me start with you. First, my idea of what the draft was supposed to be, to my initial defense of the Warrior. Your thoughts, sir?
You were correct on the idea behind the draft. There were a lot of ideas behind the draft. It was sort of an exercise in history. It was to allow people to build their dream roster with the understanding that there are still going to be some personalities you have to deal with. but mostly the historical aspect and to get a feel of what it was like to put those different pieces together to make a roster work. Your initial defense of the Warrior, I don't have any problem with it. And when you mentioned in defense of the Ultimate Warrior to me, I find the Ultimate Warrior incredibly easy to defend for a number of reasons. He's also easy to criticize. There's some cherry picking that's really easy to do with the Warrior when it comes to criticizing, but I find him very easy to defend at the same time, and you're right. He was on his way to becoming a very real cultural phenomenon. He was sort of an extension of what the Road Warriors were in the mid-'80s, in that he was pushing that whole power and paint gimmick to a new level in the singles world. Sting was doing a lot of the same stuff in WCW, but whereas Sting was burdened with RoboCop and he had been sidelined with a horrific knee injury, Warrior had the experts in Stamford, Connecticut that knew how to market their product far better than Jim Crockett Promotions and even Ted Turner did until Eric Bischoff came along. So, yeah, I agree with you that Warrior was someone that there was at least the very real potential to try to build around. Whether or not he was stable enough mentally and emotionally for that to last long term, we'll never know, but the potential was absolutely there.
But that's what I thought. Sorry, I'm now being message bombed by Jed. I need to turn away from my computer for a moment. Yeah, that was kind of my thought, and I want to go to Pat here because we were talking about this offline, and I want to bring it into the discussion. So they do the big handoff to the Warrior. The Warrior is now the guy, and you would think that in a world where things are fair and booking makes sense, that they would then, book their champion strong. They would bring in some heels that would make for interesting feuds, but ultimately they were going to get solidly behind the guy they just gave the belt to on this gigantic stage. But that's not what happened. You talked about Sting being hampered by terrible feuds, with the likes of RoboCop and such. While it never got to that disastrous of a level, the Papa Shango, I'm sure, comes close, there were some other problems with the Warrior. And I want to go to Pat here, who's one of my WWE historians. Pat, what all went wrong in the days after WrestleMania 6?
Well, the thing about WWE, and if you look at its history, really, and it's surprising to say this because we've known Vince as a risk taker with the chance he took with WrestleMania, but by and large, that company has always tried to play it safe around the top guy, whether it's constantly having to put the belt on Bruno and keep it on him, or they weren't ready to commit to the superstar Billy Graham character turning face and extending his run on top. They decided to play it safe and go with the clean-cut good guy and Bob Backlund, or what we'll see very soon in this discussion, the constant going back to Hogan. And the thing of Warrior is that they had been building around Hogan for so long that when this new face came in and people started really getting behind the Warrior, and Hogan's time was starting to fade and people who had grown up with Hulk were aging and Hulkamania started losing some steam as the Warrior really started to pick it up, they really hadn't done much of a job of establishing that next tier heel. And I think that's the big strike against Warrior in terms of his booking as champion, because his first big angle after he had won the championship from Hogan was with Rick Rude. And Rude at this point was a good hand, not the worker he would become in WCW when he had those classics with Ricky Steamboat and Dustin Rhodes, but a good hand, and he was familiar to the audience. But, they had kind of already done this angle where Rude had beaten the Warrior for the Intercontinental Championship, and, they went through that whole deal, and Warrior eventually won the title back from him after a few months in the summer of 1989 and kind of put the kibosh on that feud. And Rude was transitioned into a going-nowhere feud with Roddy Piper, and Warrior was being groomed for bigger and better things, and that culminated in WrestleMania 6 when he beat Hulk Hogan and became the man, as it were. But they gave him a recycled opponent who the audience really had no real justification to believe was a threat to the Warrior at this point, because Warrior had already kind of exorcised that demon from his past when he won the Intercontinental title back from Rude, and after that, Rude had floundered, in the feud with Roddy Piper, and then really did nothing of note up until this point. So,
well, I would say, this looked like a glorified Intercontinental title feud. The Warrior in feuding with Rick Rude a second time, what you're telling the audience is that this isn't the main feud. That he isn't in there with some of your other top guys of the company. You're in there with like the mid-card worker guys, which signals to the audience, oh, he's not really the guy. He may have the belt, but he's not really the guy. Which is sad, because as I say that, I'm like, isn't this the problem we have right now in the WWE? I think this is why I'm sympathetic towards the Warrior's cause, because a lot of the things that happened to the Warrior, the WWE is still making those same exact mistakes, and it's now, 20 to 30 years later.
Yeah, and the other big thing that kind of undercut the Warrior being the man was, Hogan was still in the picture at this point. He was going to be taking some time off to film a movie called Suburban Commando, and in order to do that, they took one of their newer heels who they hadn't really had a big run yet, in Earthquake with, and Earthquake, a big monster, 6'8", 460 pounds. They had him attack Hogan on the set of the Brother Love show on Superstars, and we'd seen Hogan get beaten up. We'd seen him have some trouble, like with King Kong Bundy, and, Andre had hurt him, but Quake was the first guy who had Hogan stretchered out and had kids crying in the audience and had people believing this might really be the end of Hogan because they've handed the title to the Warrior. We don't know where this is going. And here's where things started to get bad for the Warrior. When during this time you had constant TV promotion of Hogan where you could send him cards and letters to get well, and they would play these sappy tribute videos with all the highlights of Hulk's career, and on Rocky III and Slamming Andre and all this stuff. And the hot feud wasn't Rude Warrior, which the audience had been treated to for almost the entirety of the year before, starting, with the pose down at the Royal Rumble and going all the way to SummerSlam. The hot feud was if Hogan was going to be able to come back against this new wrecking machine, Earthquake. And so rather than give the Warrior the fresh guy who they had built effectively by squashing Hogan and letting Warrior go get revenge for Hogan, they instead chose to make the angle all about Hulk. And, this was the first pay-per-view that it culminated with SummerSlam 1990, which is the first pay-per-view following Warrior's title win, and they didn't even give Warrior a chance to see if he could draw on pay-per-view without having Hogan on it too.
This is what I mean when I say the company a lot of times has some real problems taking risks. I know there's always people that jump up and say, this company went public, they're $1 billion, look at all the success they've had. Yes, they've absolutely made some great decisions, and I'm not taking that away from them. But like many other companies, they have these enormous successes with a lot of little failures to think outside of the box in between. It's like, we're afraid, we're backed into a corner, we do something exciting, and then we're back to being afraid again. And that's really, to me, I think, the story of the Ultimate Warrior's title reign. Gavin, feel free to just jump in at any time, but I want to switch over to one of the things that I remember very closely is that by the Royal Rumble, they were more or less done with the Warrior. He drops the title to Sergeant Slaughter. Sergeant Slaughter then goes on, he's the turncoat at this point, the Iraqi turncoat, and they're building towards sort of the Gulf War-inspired WrestleMania 7 with Hulk Hogan coming in as the hero to take the title off of Slaughter. And one thing I had said to Pat was, even if they had botched the initial run with the Warrior, I think they still could have taken the title off of him at the Rumble and rebuild him going into WrestleMania into Hogan's spot. But again, they shied away from that, and they went. It's funny. We've talked about this with Sting. Larry Zonka and Steve Cook have talked about it on Business as Usual. TNA's thing is, we'll just go back to Sting. We'll go back to Sting, and it's always, go back to the guy that they think makes money. Well, in this case, instead of giving the Warrior the opportunity to be that hero and really make himself the feature of the company by taking the title back off of Slaughter, on that, enormous stage as it was, they were like, nope, forget it. We're not even going to try. We're not going to back this guy. And I'm wondering if you have any insight as to what were some of the machinations going on behind the scene that led to them just deciding to take the rug right out from the Warrior without giving him any kind of a chance.
Well, the easy finger to point is always at Hogan. And I'll admit that this is in an era before I am familiar with what was going on backstage. I don't really come into being aware of the backstage stuff with WWF until you get into sort of the Brett Shawn era with the Clique and the backstage, I can't remember their actual name, but Yokozuna and The Undertaker in that group.
The BSK.
Yeah, the BSKs. That's when I really start to become aware of what's going on backstage. So I don't want to speculate too much on that, but I do think it's interesting to note that even without the championship, even without the WWF World Heavyweight title, Warrior was moved into a very high-profile feud coming out of that title match with Sergeant Slaughter with Randy Savage. And, I would argue that WrestleMania 7 and the Warrior Savage retirement match is not only Warrior's best match, that might be Randy Savage's best match from a standpoint of he pulled a legitimate classic match out of the Ultimate Warrior. And that's not an easy thing to do. Warrior can be entertaining, absolutely, but to say that he took part in a genuine classic, that's pretty impressive from Savage's standpoint. Obviously, we know that if Hogan's around, Hogan wants the spotlight. So, like I said, that's an easy finger to point. Now, did he get in Vince's ear and say, all right, look, I did the job. I put the kid over. He's not getting the job done. Let's just go ahead and move things back to where they need to be. I don't know. But it seems likely. It seems like it fits because it's the pattern we've seen in the past. I think there could have been more with Warrior and Hogan. I think that, like you said, they're afraid to do anything different. And I think for anything to continue between Warrior and Hogan, even after WrestleMania 7, Savage is retired, Hogan has the title. For anything to continue between Hogan and Warrior, you have to run the risk of turning one of them heel. And that's not something that in 1991, 1992, they were willing to do. Warrior could have approached it from the angle, I beat you once, I can beat you again. Hogan can approach it from the angle, look, you had your shot as the champion, and you weren't best for business, to steal a phrase from 20 years later. There were options there, but like you said, that wasn't a risk that they were willing to take. Hogan was a proven formula, and they were going to run with it.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about, it's funny, as we're talking about this, I'm wondering if WrestleMania 7 isn't a much better pay-per-view with Warrior still as the champion and Randy Savage as the challenger, and it's belt versus retirement, and and Ultimate Warrior beats Savage, just as we already know that happens, but you do the same match, but you make it belt versus career, and that's your headliner, and then you have Hogan, and then maybe you put the Intercontinental title on Sergeant Slaughter, and you have Hogan, coming back to take the belt from him, something along those lines, or don't make it about the belt, just have Hogan come back to defeat the evil turncoat Iraqi. And, and if that doesn't make for a better pay-per-view than what we ultimately got, which was, I remember tensions being high, but I don't remember that pay-per-view necessarily doing all that great. Maybe I'm not totally correct about that.
They had to move it. If you remember, they had to actually move the location. It was advertised to take place at the LA Coliseum, which is, a huge arena. And after they got the initial ticket sale numbers back, they actually had to move it to the much smaller LA Sports Arena, which they used to run house shows at that would air on Z Channel. And they tried to make the excuse that because of Slaughter's, Iraqi sympathizer turncoat gimmick that, there were threats on Slaughter's life and we couldn't take chances, so we needed a smaller enclosed space. But it was bogus. It was the fact that ticket sales were not anywhere near what they were expecting. And this is after it had been advertised that, hey, it's Hogan going after Slaughter. So it is kind of interesting that they thought Hogan was the guy they could play it safe with, and ultimately the sales numbers disappointed.
Well, it's funny.
I'm not.
Hang on a second. I'm going to let you go with it. But it's funny. You point to one guy and you go, "Well, he's not the guy, brother." But when you're the reason why things are not working out very well, suddenly everyone's looking around, going, "I have no idea what you're talking about." At what point does Hogan ever point the finger at himself and say, "Hey, maybe I'm not the guy"? Go ahead, Gavin.
I was just going to say the change in venues was not a small change either. If I'm not mistaken, the original venue was something like an 80 to 85,000 seating capacity, and they ended up with, off the top of my head, I want to say 17, 18,000 people at the sports arena.
No, you're right, Gavin.
Has to be one of the smallest WrestleMania crowds ever.
Right.
But as far as pointing the finger at someone, again, you can draw a parallel 20 years later. It wasn't the Warrior. It needs to come back to me, brother. Well, Hulk, we put you in the main event of WrestleMania and ticket sales flopped. Well, yeah, that's because nobody was buying Sarge as the champion. Well, 20 years later, Battleground buy rate is the second lowest in company history. Well, yeah, nobody was buying Daniel Bryan as champion. Never mind the fact that when you have Randy Orton and Triple H on screen to open Raw, the crowd's chanting yes, 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 even in the absence of Daniel Bryan. It's easier to point the finger at the man out in the main event scene and reintroduce John Cena, old faithful.
Yeah.
Cena put the exact opposite of Hulk Hogan, I think. That's something that can always be said in defense of Cena. If he's been willing to put people, he has encouraged them to take chances with people. He has not asserted himself in the title picture. He's just the formula that Vince keeps going back to for the last decade.
That's one of the things I've always defended Cena about as well. Is unless somebody can come up with some concrete proof that he's, I think other wrestlers have accused it of him, but then that also might be sour grapes. From what I understand to Cena, it's like, look, if you're going to keep putting me in the spotlight, I'll take it. But I'm not going to, but I'm certainly not going to stop, or hinder somebody else being pushed into the spotlight. He seems to recognize that he must work with a team of people at the top, that he can't just be there by himself, which is starkly removed from the way Triple H thought about things when it was his time at the top.
Yeah, for someone that grew up idolizing Charlie Grace and Ric Flair, it's a lesson that Triple H did not learn.
Hey, Gavin, is there something wrong with your phone?
I'm not in a great service area, so my phone is working off of an AT&T micro cell, so I may get choppy.
Okay, yeah, you're a little choppy there. I want to switch gears for a moment. What was that?
I was asking about beforehand. Because the wire is much easier to maintain the connection. But I can find it's quite cold still.
I want to switch gears for a moment and talk a little bit about, I want to link two things. One, so I announced that I'm picking the Ultimate Warrior as my baby face, and uproarious laughter. Jed doesn't even think I'm being serious. He thinks I'm trolling. Chris is, continually reminding everyone that I took the Ultimate Warrior because, isn't that funny? And I know why I got that reaction, because 20 years later, you look back at the Ultimate Warrior. The Ultimate Warrior says things like "queering don't make the world go round," and he becomes like, so far to the right that Rush Limbaugh looks like Rachel Maddow, and it's like he becomes a crazy person. But what's even worse than that is you have things that are out there that people take fairly seriously, and and it's like he who writes the history book, he who wins writes the history books, And it doesn't necessarily mean it's an accurate reflection of what really happened. So what am I talking about? The Ultimate Warrior is accused of holding up the WWE for money. The Ultimate Warrior is accused of being a maniac backstage and difficult to work with. So I want to go over to Pat here. How much of that is justified? And can we provide context? I mean, if he did some legit dumb things backstage that have made him, that would put the WWE in a place where they would rewrite history and make him look like a total moron. What is the context of that? Because there's always two sides to a story.
Yeah, I know that prior to SummerSlam 91, which is the incident of the alleged holdup that took place where he demanded more money for his match, and he was very shortly fired after the match at Madison Square Garden. The only incident that anybody had ever said or heard of that they took place where Warrior was kind of, too big for his britches was when he was initially working with Rick Rude, and Warrior, we all know he was not a great ring general in the sense of a Ricky Steamboat. The guy was, a powerhouse and tended to not really restrain himself at times. And, in order to work together, you have to take it easy on each other so you can work the next night and still make money. And Rick Rude, who was known as a legitimately tough guy and had worked as a bouncer with the Road Warriors and was never one to shy away from physical conflict, told the Warrior he needs to lighten up. And Warrior kind of went off on him and said, I'm the Warrior and this and that. And Rude basically dropped him with an open hand slap. And that's been told by a few guys. But other than that, there was never really anything that people said as far as him gaining an ego or anything like that or trying to do that, other than he and Sting, when they were teaming up, had what Sting referred to as not a friendly breakup, whatever that means. But there really wasn't a point where Warrior kind of had done anything significant like that to endanger the company. He liked to travel alone because he didn't have a lot of respect for the guys he worked with, and he's gone on record as calling them the most as juveniles in adult bodies with dangerous effects, and I don't disagree with that, especially at the time he was in the WWE. But he just wasn't a popular guy because he wasn't a guy who was in wrestling because he loved wrestling. He was in wrestling because it was a good way for him to make a living for himself and his family, and ain't nothing wrong with that.
Hang on.
But,
so I have that guy who's only in it for the money, Brock Lesnar who's only in it for the money, and Goldberg who's only in it for the money. I'm awesome at picking talent.
Well, we reap what we sow, but prior to this incident of him, with this alleged holdup, he wasn't a guy who endangered the company quite so much. And then this incident happened at SummerSlam 91 where he said he wasn't going out to the ring unless he was given a substantial amount of money or whatever. And let's be real, Mark, we did an Everybody Loves a Bad Guy on Robert's show on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network where we talked about the evil of promoters, and it's not unlike Vince McMahon to withhold funds from people or justify means for him to cheat them out of money. Jesse Ventura's court case against him is the prime example, where Jesse was awarded over $800,000 in royalties, and the case is now benchmarked in laws of restitution. So, for all we know,
didn't they have this problem also with Jeff Jarrett, where no one's keeping their eye on the ball? His contract is set to expire right before he's supposed to drop the title to China, and he says, "No, you're going to pay me what you owe me, or I'm just going to walk away." And they have to fix it. And then Jeff Jarrett looks like a bastard, but it's like, well, no, I'm not working for free.
Yeah, and Jeff Jarrett has always said more so than Vince McMahon, it was Jim Ross who constantly tried to change the terms of the deal on him, and that when his contract did expire, he was owed a significant amount of money in royalties and back merchandising at that time, and he wanted that money up front, that what he was owed. And say what you will about Jeff, he's never changed his story as far as this goes. He wanted the money that was owed him, nothing more, but he wanted it right then and there, so he knew he would get it without his contract and without having to fight for it. And, good business by Jeff in terms of getting what he was owed, and maybe not so good because he's permanently burned a bridge in Connecticut, but for all we know, and listen, Warrior was a merchandising powerhouse. I would venture to say that in 1991, he was out selling Hogan in merchandise. And I remember watching the tapes and seeing the arenas and all the Warrior T-shirts and the action figures, and I owned quite a few things of Warrior myself, more so than Hogan for sure. But for all we know, this is Warrior demanding what was owed to him, and it's been taken out of context and spun that, he tried to cost us money for no reason, and we summarily terminated him. Well, if that's the case, why would you bring him back 6 months later?
Well, the other side of that is, he may have also felt like he had been burned. If we're sitting here sort of, talking about it years later about how he wasn't properly booked and he had the rug taken right out from under him, and you had Hogan sort of clipping him at the knees every step of the way, maybe he's bitter. He's a human being. And I think we tend to assume these guys are going to be absolutely perfectly behaved citizens, who are always going to do who are always going to maintain integrity and do the right thing. Now, he's a human being, same as anybody else. And he's probably looking at the situation same as you are and thinking, hey, wait a minute, I'm probably more popular than Hogan, but they keep giving him back the ball and undercutting me. Well, then fine. Then just pay me a lot of money, and I'll go lose to whoever you want me to lose to, which is not an unreasonable attitude to have, given all of the things that have happened to him.
It goes into a discussion that we can bring up with that Brian Pillman had years ago with Ole Anderson. Ole Anderson took over as a booker for WCW in 1990 under Jim Herd, and there were certain guys that had guaranteed contracts at that point, Pillman being one of them, and Ole, for the life of him, couldn't understand why Pillman was, going to get this contract and said, this guy's a jobber. Why are we doing this? And, so Ole told him, hey, well, I'll book you a little bit better, but you're not getting this money. And Pillman said, well, fuck you. I'll be your highest paid jobber then, and I'll take the money.
You want to chime in?
Similar mindset.
Gavin, you want to chime in here with some thoughts on whether or not the Ultimate Warrior has been viewed fairly in the history books, some thoughts on what Pat and I have said, or maybe he's reacting appropriately to a situation that was vastly out of his control.
Well, I think you touched on it inadvertently when you talked about the guys that you drafted and only being in it for the money. Wrestling, as we mentioned on this podcast before, is a very peculiar business. It doesn't run like any other business model on the planet. And so when you take someone like Warrior, like Goldberg, like Brock Lesnar, that approaches the wrestling business like it's not always well received within the industry.
You mean by the cult?
A lot about all three of those men ring eerily similar. They have no respect for the business. They don't care about tradition. They have egos. They're only in it for the money. Well, so what? It's a job. You provide a service for which you are compensated. How well you are compensated is directly proportionate to how well you perform your job description. For a professional wrestler, the job description is sell tickets, sell merchandise, increase ratings, increase buy rates. All three of those men, Warrior, Goldberg, Lesnar, fulfill their job description and did it to remarkable levels. So to hear someone say, Warrior doesn't care about the history of the business, he probably doesn't give a damn about Harley Race defending the title in St. Louis, Missouri in 1974 against a 50-year-old junior, or however old he was, and going to a 90-minute Broadway because Bob Geigel couldn't agree with the other board of director members who was going over. Probably doesn't care about that.
Gavin, I don't remember that match, but you know what I do remember? The 30 seconds it took the Ultimate Warrior to beat the Honky Tonk Man on Superstars to win the IC title. Were you really? That's awesome.
I was in the arena. It is the loudest reaction to anything in a wrestling arena I've ever heard.
Yeah. And I'm just backing up Gavin's point there, where, you sometimes, Goldberg, Brock Lesnar was probably the best worker of the three, but, Goldberg and the Ultimate Warrior were awesome because they were promoted by their editing. Go in, smash, leave. Crowd goes insane. I think Jed's line about the Legion of Doom. They'll run down to the ring, smash you for 30 seconds, and the crowd will go crazy for the next half hour. Well, that's exactly what you did with Goldberg and the Ultimate Warrior.
I'm also of the opinion that when it comes to faces and heels, not just in wrestling but in life, what you do is not as important as who you do it to. And you look at somebody like Eddie Guerrero, whose character and heel character was very much the same character. The difference was when he did it to Rio Jr., he was an evil bird. When he did it to Kurt Angle, it was hilarious. And the same holds true in wrestling. You know, Harley Race is beloved because he didn't like something you were doing in the ring. He'd punch you in the face for real. He'd stiff you. He'd get you back in line. He'd stretch you. Well, Ultimate Warrior went 1,000 miles an hour because that's what his character was and that's what his personality was. And because he stiffed someone who was beloved like Andre the Giant repeatedly, a bad guy. No, it's just who he is. And Andre handled the situation, and that was the end of it. But it's not so much what you do as who you do it to. And the fact that Warrior got on the bedside of people like Bobby Heenan and Andre the Giant, people who are almost personally beloved because of his attitude, because of a handful of his actions, is going to cause him to be painted in a negative light. Let's also not forget that he squashed a certain someone at a Wrestlemania who now happens to run the country, or run the company, not the country, the company.
No, I think he runs the country too. It's him and Obama, as we all know.
I would prefer him. That's another part.
No, because if he's running the country as well as he's running the company, we've already got enough problems, Gavin. Thank you very much. I'd rather they put Citizen Kane in there.
But, you know, the fact that he's gotten on the bad side of the previous owner and he got on the bad side of the guy that's running things now doesn't bode well for him in the future. And it would appear that some fences have been mended, and maybe all took was writing a check or two, but Warrior's name is no longer taboo in WWE, so there's that league.
With the few minutes that we have left, I want to move the discussion along here, because as we're talking about the Warrior, what I'm realizing is that when you look at how the WWE has historically treated a lot of their wrestlers, I think that it's been, you know, when you look at the Nash and Hall exodus and how things were at WCW, and let me paint this picture for you. You have a history of guys feeling like they are being left out to dry by the WWE, like they're not being paid their worth, and you know it's a culture as you guys have been describing of, you know, follow the cult or you're going to get buried, and you know, pay your proper respects. You know, keep calling it a cult. It's like a religion. You know, this becomes a problem for some people, you know, who realize that this is entertainment. It's a job, and they expect to be treated accordingly, not have to fall in line with some ridiculous religious rule. And so there's an opportunity to go to Atlanta where the management there will pay you your worth. Now, there's arguments to be made that they overdid it, and they made some terrible decisions like giving certain people creative control, making wrestlers into bookers, you know, managers, not like, you know, Jim Cornette managers. I mean like real managers, Hollywood managers, people who, I can't remember the guy that worked with Scott Hall, but, you know, things like writing into your contract that if somebody gets paid more than you, they have to bump up your salary. Those things are probably overdoing it. But for the most part, what WCW does is it moves the WWE into a direction that it was uncomfortable with and was fairly new territory, which was it now has to pay competitive wages. The one thing about the Attitude Era was, yes, people remember it for Steve Austin driving trucks into the ring and hitting people with, and giving beer baths and everything, and there was TNA all over the place and middle fingers and all of that. But what I always found fascinating, what was going on internally at the WWE, the realization that they now had to act like a company with competition. And the wrestlers benefited from it became a whole new world backstage, because now the wrestlers are having to be paid their worth. And while they weren't doing dumb things like WCW was, they couldn't do the things that they were doing to the Warrior. You see what I'm saying, Pat? When you look back with that lens, and you realize that that a lot of the mistreatment, as Gavin was talking about, of the Warrior is really a reflection of they're no longer allowed to bully their talent. I mean, I think things have now reverted back to that because there is no more competition. But it wasn't like that about 10 years ago, about 10, 15 years ago. You see what I'm saying, Pat?
No, absolutely. And, part of this will always take place. It'll always revert back to that until wrestlers smarten up and unionize, because and we could go on for another show about that and the independent contractor agreement being bullshit. But, it'll always be that way unless there is some sort of equal parity playing ground right across from you. You go to any street corner in the country and there's a gas station on each of the four corners. There's not that now, but there was a time when Vince was the only game in town in the 80s, despite what people will tell you about Crockett. Crockett was never doing close to what Vince was doing at the time, and Vince didn't have to make these guys guaranteed deals. He can tell you, well, I'll give you an opportunity where you could potentially make this much. And certain guys did reach that stratosphere, and Warrior was probably one of them. And because of these guys being able to do this, and eventually somebody smartening up and saying, hey, I know he told you could do this, but I'm going to give you this right off the bat. You're entitled to this no matter what if you come and work for me. It became very different. And without guys like the Warrior kind of having the balls, some people will call it gutless and unprofessional. Some people will call it having the balls to say, hey, I'm worth this much and you're only giving me this. This isn't right. I'm not doing this until I'm properly compensated. You wouldn't have guys getting the sweetheart deals that they did for a long time. And it's dropped off now because there is no real competition, which is fortunate for the company and unfortunate for the workers. But guys like Warrior doing that, or guys like Jesse Ventura calling their own shots, that forced the hands of these guys to give these guaranteed contracts. And to no small credit also Lex Luger, who actually got the first guaranteed contract on record. But because of these guys taking these chances, guys actually wound up with a better working situation, whether they realize it or not, and never gave credit to these guys for it, which is kind of unfortunate and short-sighted in a lot of ways.
And I want to bring Gavin back in, but this is the whole point why I want to focus a lot on how the WWE financially treated its wrestlers and how it was forced to change by the Eric Bischoff era WCW, good, bad, or indifferent. You have to acknowledge that the Eric Bischoff WCW forced the WWE to change the way it did just about everything. It forced them to take risks. It forced them to change the pay scale. It forced them to change the way they treated the wrestlers. This could no longer be the cultist fraternity where if you don't pay homage to the Big Babu, then you're going to get buried, even if you're the most popular guy in the auditorium. Bryan Danielson. Sorry, got distracted there for a minute by what's going on now. But I know that. But so the point that I'm trying to make is that when there's uproarious laughter about who would draft the Ultimate Warrior, that crazy person. Well, no, let's look at the whole timeline of things that were going on. That people said he was crazy, and you think, oh well, hey, wait a minute. There's some context here that has to be acknowledged. Gavin, I want to bring you in, and then we're going to start to close out.
Well, Pat was talking about guys like Brian Pillman and on down the line that have said, you're going to pay me what I'm worth. Whether it's been Brian Pillman or whether it's been Warrior, we saw that exact scenario play out just a couple of years ago, only because they chose to just air the dirty laundry on television and make an angle out of it with CM Punk. how real it was by the time it got to television, the world will never know. CM Punk to this day maintains that the original pipe bomb promo was real, which, again, as Triple H said in one of his interviews, we don't see people with live microphones and not know what they're going to say. That's a risk that the FCC is not willing to take. But how much of that played out the scene before it got to television, where CM Punk just said, you know what, no, I'm worth this much. I know what I can do inside the ring. You're going to pay me this much money or I'm walking away. And it's the type of move that the Ultimate Warrior is just absolutely historically crucified for, in saying, you know what, I want my money, give it to me. And Internet Darling does literally the exact same thing 20 years later. And it's the coolest thing that ever happened. There's definitely a double standard when it comes to guys that are like Tim, that cut their teeth in the independent scene. As a secretary, it was pretty much out of nowhere and dropped into superstardom, which I think is also worth the Ultimate Warrior, while he doesn't have the indie pedigree and thousands of matches under his belt like CM Punk and Daniel Bryan and these guys, it's worth noting that the Ultimate Warrior has a pretty impressive pedigree in his own right, because the same guy that trained Ultimate Warrior trained obviously Sting, but also John Cena and Samoa Joe. This man has a pretty good track record for being able to turn guys into marketable stars. So it's not like the Ultimate Warrior is just a guy that wanted and says, all right, I got muscles, make my face and let's go. He was produced a guy that knew what he was doing. So,
well, the Ultimate Warrior is also not the only guy who was very dependent on his look and his character and didn't necessarily do all that he could in the ring. Whether it's injury or whether it's you've chosen a character to wrestle a certain way, so that's all you're going to do, even though you might be capable of doing more. And I can think of two examples of guys who said that exact same thing. One of them was injury-ridden, which is why he had to change his style, but people loved him anyway. He was beloved, and he was actually originally my number one pick for the guy, and before I decided on Goldberg. And the other one was also somebody who said, look, I'm this gigantic man mountain of a wrestler. And while I can do a lot of these things, I'm just not going to. That's not who I'm supposed to be out there. I'm not supposed to be, Bret Hart. I'm supposed to be, man mountain Zeke. And that's Steve Austin and Brock Lesnar, respectively. People, it's funny. They brought Steve Austin into the WWE as he calls himself a mechanic. They brought him in to be a worker because he was a good technical wrestler, except that when his character became Stone Cold Steve Austin, the psychotic killer, and he switched to a more brawling style. Steve Austin's matches were not exactly things of beauty back then. We all loved Steve Austin because of the beer bath, because of driving trucks into the ring, because he was the first person to ever put his hands on Vince McMahon and made him pee. I was there at Madison Square Garden when he stunned Vince McMahon. And people went apeshit. And maybe he's a little bit better than I'm describing him if doesn't break his neck, but that's exactly what happened. He breaks his neck, and he can't ever wrestle that style again, so he becomes, the bad punch-throwing brawler. And nobody ever criticizes him for it because they loved everything else about his character. Brock Lesnar, very similar thing, minus the injury. Brock Lesnar is this, NCAA divisional champion and all of that. He's got a great pedigree. He goes to OVW. He actually learns to wrestle appropriately. He can do all of these wonderful things. And then they book him as Earthquake, essentially. They booked him as a monster. Well, then why do you need to be doing wrist locks and hammer locks and all of this chain wrestling when you... It's shooting star presses, which he's still really bitter about that they made him do it. And then he landed on his head. But, but that's the point. If you're Brock Lesnar, why would you do any of those things? It's almost like on the one hand, people acknowledge that wrestling is a show and that these are characters and that the stuff they're doing in the ring is an extension of those personalities. And then they conveniently forget it when they just want to bury somebody and say, oh, he can't wrestle. It's funny. Jed and I have been talking throughout the podcast tonight, and he was like, oh, the Ultimate Warrior still can't wrestle. And my exact reaction to that was, who cares? It doesn't matter. And that's also debatable that he can't wrestle, but let's just take for granted that he can't. I didn't want him to wrestle. The last thing I wanted to see the Ultimate Warrior do was a 30-minute mat classic with Mr. Perfect. I wanted him to run to the ring, smash the fuck out of somebody, and run out again. That's it. That's all I wanted. If I want to see good professional technical wrestling, give me Mr. Perfect and Rick Rude. Perfectly happy with that. But that's not what I want out of the Ultimate Warrior. I mean, you don't go to the grocery store and pick up several different food items and expect them all to taste the same. Why would you do that? You know what I mean? Last words on this. I'll go to you, Pat.
I think the Ultimate Warrior is ultimately, no pun intended, a guy who revisionist history will always revile unfairly because, listen, professional wrestling is not about who the best in-ring performer is. That's what we have the NCAA for and the Olympics and all that ilk. This is an entertainment business where compelling characters draw you in, and really the in-ring action is secondary to what these characters represent and why you're invested in them. It's a morality play that has a little bit of physical action, but is more about the personalities. And the Warrior had a great personality that captured a very time-specific era and got over like $1 million with, my generation for sure. You guys too. I think you're a little bit older than me, not much, but you guys can relate to that this guy was, the people's choice for a good period of time and very representative. And he was a colorful, bright, shining star in one of the most talent-filled eras in wrestling. And if I'm running a promotion, I'm going to take that guy over the 5'8", 210-pound guy who maybe knows every hold from Little I Joe to Damned If I Know and can work 60 minutes, but gets a 2.5 table rating for me, as opposed to the guy who runs in, cashes you, and 40,000 people are cheering for the next 15 minutes. I'm going with the Warrior, and I think he gets unfairly vilified by people who really weren't even watching wrestling at the time and have just gone off of the word of people who are allegedly in the know. And it's unfortunate that the Internet has kind of cultivated that kind of attitude towards things. But Warrior was a star, whether you like it or not. He was a draw, and I think the real people who know what actually goes on will give Warrior the credit he deserves.
At least in private. I don't think it happens publicly, not now.
Begrudgingly so.
Yeah, begrudgingly. Gavin, I want to thank you for hopping on tonight. I know you're busy with Casual Hero stuff, but I always enjoy your input and your take on the history of wrestling. Your final thoughts on the mistreatment of the Ultimate Warrior throughout the years.
Wait, did Mark draft the Ultimate Warrior?
Fuck you, Chris. Fuck you, Chris. And to answer your question, yes.
The mistreatment of the Ultimate Warrior, I think everyone is involved in it. I don't think it's a grand conspiracy. I think the Ultimate Warrior has, whether intentionally or unintentionally, made it difficult for people within the industry to like him. I think that he is certainly a different individual, inside, outside of wrestling, whatever. Just the guy's personality makes him more than a little odd. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But if you look at it, like we touched on earlier, from strictly the standpoint of a business model, if you're just in it for the money, that's fine, because ultimately, you know why Vince McMahon's in the wrestling industry? For the money. He didn't do it to break even. He didn't do it to run a business at a loss. He did it to make money. And for whatever reason, guys like Goldberg, Brock Lesnar, and yes, the Ultimate Warrior are frowned upon when they're upfront about the fact that they do the same thing. historically, unfortunately, the Warrior will probably never get as much credit as he deserves, but I think there's plenty of blame to go around for it.
I think maybe that was why I gravitated towards those three, and I don't want to go into a whole thing about my roster. That's what your podcast is for when we talk about it again. But I think the message that I was sending out was two things, and I'll probably repeat this when we do your podcast. One, television and movies, as I say all the time on the Long Road to Ruin, is a visual medium. If what you're looking at on screen is not interesting, you don't have an audience anymore. And that's the bottom line for me. So when I, and Pat's joke about the bingo hall and everything was more centered on the ECW and TNA guys I was picking, not on those three in particular. Those three sort of brought the plane out of a nosedive, according to Pat. But I was going for a look, and I wanted guys that were interesting on screen and captured the imagination of audiences and had a record of doing so. I go back to my initial statement. You cannot deny that those three individuals, the Warrior, Lesnar, and Goldberg, captured the imaginations of fans in their eras across this country and somewhat into the rest of the world. People love those guys. They were there with them. That's why Goldberg was the guy for a short bit of time. And if Brock Lesnar had stayed in the WWE, he would have been the guy. And, they were certainly grooming him as such. And we've talked about the Warrior for the last hour. He could have been the guy if the company had decided to get behind him. They forced him to be what historically he has become, and that's their own fault. Which is when they're doing it now with Bryan Danielson. But the other side of that is, so I'm looking at people who I think are interesting to look at on television and can capture people's imaginations. I also don't care about the legacy of professional wrestling as such. As you said, Gavin, it's a business. I want people who will show up to work. Come in, do your job, promote the business, go home to your families. That's not a whole lot to ask. And those three guys, I think, if treated fairly, do that. I think their legacies are tarnished because they were treated unfairly, and we could do another 2 hours on Goldberg and Brock Lesnar and how they got treated, and now how history looks poorly back at them. So I think it's a good exercise to, every once in a while sit down with people who have at least some knowledge of the history of this thing and say, no, let's set the record straight on some of these guys, because the WWE has a tendency to shine a negative light on people who, as you said, Gavin, are just not willing to play ball and honor the legacy of the boys, the legacy of wrestling, which I think is a crock of shit. It's a job. Let's give up this cultist mentality that seems to ruin it for both the wrestlers and the fans alike.
Yes, let's condemn all the Walmart workers who don't care about the history of Walmart and are not there because they love Walmart.
There you go. We all have jobs, right? Do we go into work, raising the flag of the place that we work for and say, I'm so proud to do that? No, we go in, we do our jobs, and we collect our checks. And I'm very fond of telling my boss, such and such needs to happen because I need to get paid. How do you like them apples? And he's like, oh, but I need you to do this. And I'm just like, I need to get paid, motherfucker.
That's right, you round it up.
That's right. Then I walk around singing, I need money, which is what Clutch comes out to when they perform. I need money. Dun, 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 dun. You know that song, Pat?
I do, but I prefer to sing With My Baby Tonight. And actually, I don't even really sing it. My roadie sings it.
Totally 80s, Pat. All right. I want to thank you guys, unless you have a burning desire to add to my final rant there. This was fun. I enjoyed this. This was sort of off the cuff. We were just talking, and we decided, hey, why talk privately when we can talk to an audience of who the hell knows? So I want to thank Pat for being a good sport and jumping on this thing with me and providing some great insight. And I want to thank Gavin for taking time out of his busy schedule to lend his knowledge of wrestling and the Warrior. And I feel validated now. You all hurt my feelings, Chris, laughing at me the way you did. Last words, Gavin.
I look forward to recapping the draft as a whole and picking apart the different rosters. But I think it'll be fun with some time and perspective to look at that roster in particular with those three guys on it and see how we can envision things playing out. Because, truth be told, there are a lot worse options center a promotion around
like
than
Jerry
the
Lawler.
Ultimate Warrior. I don't know.
Yeah.
Lawler had a pretty good run in Memphis.
And nowhere else.
But in defense of the Warrior, as long as you know what you're getting into with him, as long as you know there's going to be haggling over the paycheck, as long as you know that occasionally he's not going to want to do a job, and as long as you know that occasionally other top stars are going to be unhappy working with him, yeah, go for it. If you're prepared for the headache, then knock yourself out. Run with it.
Everything you just said, you could have said about at least a dozen other people.
Not me, though.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for Gavin on the show, for coming on the show, Gavin. Go ahead and real quick run through your plugs, and we'll get out of here.
You can listen to us over at www.thecasualheroes.com, or you can find us on iTunes under The Casual Heroes. If you don't mind, go listen to us. If you like us, rate us 5 stars. If you don't like us, rate us 5 stars. I don't really care if you like us or not. We just want your ratings. We try to get a few podcasts up a week. We do movies. We do football, picks against the spread on a pickcast. We do wrestling. Occasionally, we do comic books. Every now and then, we feel froggy and just get on there and talk about nothing in particular. And we're working on a conspiracy cast where we look at some of the better conspiracy theories in American and world history. When we get that put together, I'll definitely give you a heads up. You can also follow us on Twitter at The Casual Heroes. And you can follow me personally on Twitter at Gavin Napier TCH.
You used to do an MMA cast, but now Chris hates me for some odd reason and doesn't want to talk to me. So, makes me sad.
We haven't done an MMA cast or a hot cast for a very long time, although I think it might be worth my time to get Pat involved in the Casual Heroes a little more and maybe start a boxing cast where we can talk about whether or not Vitaly Klitschko is ever going to defend his title again and the high-quality opposition that they keep finding for Vlad.
I believe those are the cab drivers that we keep talking about on Sundays.
Yes, that would be the Ukraine's version of the cab driver, which is my answer to Clucky the MMA chicken.
Sean Comer also wants to be a part of the Casual Heroes. Apparently, people have enjoyed.
Who doesn't want to be a part? The Casual Heroes are rocking.
I'll tell you what. Since the Casual Heroes have joined the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, you have garnered more fans. So this worked very well for you guys. And I guess I've gotten some fans that were listening to your stuff once they started to hear me. So it's been a mutually beneficial arrangement. But yeah, Sean Comer wants to be on the Casual Heroes. Pat wants to be on the Casual Heroes. I want to be on the Casual Heroes. I don't think you have enough of me around. That's the problem here. You need me, the Ultimate Warrior, the Ultimate Jewish Warrior. What do you think about that, Gavin?
I need you to snarl more. If you can snarl more, then by all means, you're welcome to be on more shows.
I said the Ultimate Jewish Warrior. What you're going to get is nasal. See, I'm gonna go. Oh, Hogan, let me tell you.
I can live with that.
All right. Pat, you got anything going on this week?
Only the hottest MMA radio show around today, the 411 Ground and Pound radio show, which I had to take a little hiatus from these 2 weeks. I will be back not this Sunday, but the following Sunday, as I am doing some work for the church, so I will not be available, but there's not really a whole lot to cover other than a very rancid fight card that happened.
You're going to miss out on the review of Mark Hunt Decides versus Bigfoot Silva. What are you, some sort of communist and homosexual?
I answer only to attorneys, and even though you're Jewish, you don't qualify.
All right. Thanks, guys, for coming on the show tonight. This was fun. We'll have to do an impromptu podcast again soon. We will talk again on the Casual Heroes. Until then, be well, be safe, and behave.